September 23, 2009. United Nations General Assembly, New York. A man walks up to the podium carrying a yellowish folder and a speech that would change the fate of an entire nation and seal his own. For 90 minutes, one of the longest speeches in UN history, Muammar Gaddafi not only exposed the contradictions of the international system, he signed his own death sentence. And if you're wondering how a single speech could bring down a dictator who ruled for 42 years, stay until the end, because what you're about to discover will completely change your perspective on global geopolitics. You're about to see how one speech could seal the fate of an entire nation, how words spoken in New York resonated through the streets of Tripoli, and why, just 2 years later, Libya's brother leader would be brutally murdered. If you're one of those who believes official history doesn't always tell the whole truth, you'll want to follow every word of this investigation. And if you're not yet part of this community seeking to understand the hidden side of African geopolitics, maybe it's time to join us, like this video and subscribe. To grasp the magnitude of this speech, we need to travel back in time. Muammar Gaddafi wasn't just another African dictator. He was an anomaly in the global system. 1969. A young officer, only 27 years old, leads a coup that topples King Idris. What happened next was extraordinary. Libya became the African country with the highest Human Development Index on the continent, ranked 53rd in the world by 2010. Education and healthcare were free for all citizens. The world's largest freshwater aquifer was developed beneath the Sahara Desert. Libya's standard of living surpassed that of many European nations. But Gaddafi had an obsession that went beyond Libya. He dreamed of African unification, the United States of Africa, a common gold-backed African currency, and total liberation of the continent from Western powers. For the West, this wasn't just a dream. It was an existential threat. In 2009, the world was still bleeding from the worst financial crisis since 1929, and here was Gaddafi, sitting on over $110 billion in reserves, proposing alternatives to the Western financial system. Libya held 143 tons of gold, over $110 billion in foreign reserves, zero external debt, and high-quality oil. But the most dangerous thing wasn't his wealth. It was his vision. Gaddafi was funding projects that directly threatened Western interests: an African central bank, an African monetary fund, and a continent-wide gold-backed currency called the African gold dinar. Imagine the nightmare for the West, a financially independent Africa. No more need for the IMF, the World Bank, or the France-controlled CFA franc. African oil traded in gold dinars instead of dollars. Then, on that September morning, Gaddafi did the unthinkable. He didn't come to make diplomacy. He came to declare war on the system. Picture the scene. The hall is packed. Presidents, prime ministers, representatives from nearly every country in the world. Cameras broadcast live to billions. Gaddafi walks up wearing his signature African robe, defying Western protocol from the start. The United Nations was founded by 3 or 4 countries against Germany during World War II, he declared. We reject these provisions. In short, he had called the UN fraudulent. But that was only the beginning. He went on to demolish every pillar of the international system. 65 wars have broken out since the establishment of the United Nations, with more victims than in World War II. These wars served the interests of one or a few countries. He was doing what no world leader dared to do, listing the crimes of the West in front of the West itself: Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Western delegates shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered among themselves. Gaddafi raised the UN Charter and tore up a copy on live television. The symbolism was clear. The rules were broken, and Africa would no longer play by them. But the most dangerous moment was still to come. During his speech, he laid out his vision. The Security Council should represent all nations through regional unions. Africa deserved a permanent seat. It was a debt owed for its colonized past. Then he dropped the final bomb. Colonial powers must pay reparations for centuries of looting, slavery, and resource extraction. Imagine the implications. France compensating its former colonies, Belgium paying for the Congo, Britain for India and Africa. We're talking trillions of dollars. Gaddafi wasn't just proposing reform, he was declaring the end of the colonial era and the birth of a new world order. The reaction was immediate. "Gaddafi rants at the UN," screamed the headlines. "Bizarre speech from Libyan dictator." The strategy was clear. If you can't refute the message, discredit the messenger. But behind the scenes, something far darker was unfolding. WikiLeaks would later reveal that, immediately after the speech, the first moves to destabilize Libya began. Years later, Hillary Clinton's leaked emails exposed the real reason for the intervention: to prevent Gaddafi from creating a gold-backed African currency that would threaten the dominance of the dollar and the euro. A 2011 memo showed that France was particularly alarmed. Gaddafi threatened the CFA franc, the currency France imposes on 14 African countries as a tool of neo-colonial control. 2 years later, in 2011, the Arab Spring reached Libya. But unlike other countries, Libya's protests quickly turned into an armed insurgency. NATO intervened militarily, supposedly to protect civilians, but what followed was full regime change. Thousands of bombings, day and night attacks, direct support for rebel groups. On October 20, 2011, Muammar Gaddafi was captured near Sirte. He was beaten, tortured, and ultimately executed. Upon hearing the news, Hillary Clinton laughed and said, "We came, we saw, he died." Today, more than a decade later, we can see the results. Libya is a failed state. The country with Africa's highest HDI became a land ruled by militias, human trafficking, slave markets, and total chaos. 2 rival governments. Neither controls the country. Living standards have collapsed. Infrastructure is destroyed. African migrants are sold as slaves in open markets. The 143 tons of gold vanished. The $110 billion in reserves mysteriously disappeared. Plans for the African Central Bank died with Gaddafi. The CFA franc still controls African economies. And here are the questions you must ask yourself. Was it a coincidence? Was it really a spontaneous popular revolution, or a coordinated operation to eliminate a threat to the global order? The truth is that on that September day in 2009, Gaddafi wasn't merely giving a speech. He was challenging a power system that has existed for centuries. He proposed that Africa finally free itself, and those elites responded the only way they know how when they feel threatened. They eliminated the threat, destroyed the example, and sent a message to every other African leader. This is what happens when you challenge the system, because that is the real message behind Gaddafi's fall. It doesn't matter how much gold you have, or how many reserves you build. If you threaten the interests of the established powers, you will be eliminated. And the way they eliminate you will be presented as liberation, as humanitarian intervention. The media will ridicule you in life and erase you in death. Gaddafi's story teaches us something fundamental about the world we live in. It shows that the rules about democracy, human rights, and international order are often just for public display, while behind the scenes a very different game is being played. It shows us that challenging the interests of the global elites is more dangerous than any crime, that the system will tolerate dictators, corruption, and abuse as long as they play by the established rules. But when you try to change those rules, when you propose a real alternative, that's when you become a target. Gaddafi had the vision, he had the resources, he had the support of many Africans, but he didn't have the strategy to protect all of it from a system that has spent centuries perfecting the art of maintaining control. Because the system is still there, the same institutions, the same interests, the same methods, and they will continue to respond the same way every time they feel threatened. Some truths are too dangerous to be spoken. Gaddafi learned that in the worst possible way. But his story lives on. His words still echo. Because as long as there are people willing to question the system, as long as there are communities like this one willing to share these stories, the conversation continues. This is the story of the speech that led to Gaddafi's downfall. A story of ambition, vision, power, and the brutal consequences of defying the most powerful forces in the world. If you want to keep uncovering stories like these, the ones that rarely reach us, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, because together we can make sure these truths are never forgotten.